In football, some legends reach the very top only to collapse overnight. Cruel injuries, inner demons, or pressure they couldn't handle. Today, we're looking back at 10 players whose careers fell apart far too early, and we start right away with a former Ballon d'Or winner. We're in the mid-1960s. At Manchester United, a kid from Northern Ireland is shocking Europe. George Best. At 17, he dribbles like no one else, plays with an almost insolent ease, and quickly becomes the first rock star in football history. Pure talent, superstar aura, devastating charm. He fascinates as much as he overwhelms. In 1968, he reaches his peak. In the European Cup final against Benfica, he scores a legendary solo goal, brings Manchester United the title, and wins the Ballon d'Or at only 22. The world believes it has found the next king of football for the entire decade. Best himself would later say, "I reached the top and all that was left was to come back down." But very quickly, everything collapses around him. Fame doesn't follow him, it consumes him. Nights out become daily, excess becomes routine, and alcohol becomes his escape. Best summed up his life with a now iconic quote, "I spent a lot of money on booze, birds, and fast cars. The rest I just squandered." At Manchester United, lateness, disappearances, and sanctions pile up. On the pitch, flashes of genius still appear, but the intensity, the discipline, the hunger, all of it is gone. At 27, when most legends are just entering their prime, George Best's career at the highest level is already almost over. What follows is a long escape. Clubs all around the world, short stints, occasional moments of brilliance, but never again the player he once was. George Best remains one of the greatest natural talents the sport has ever seen, a pure artist, a prodigy that appears once in a generation, but also one of football's biggest what-ifs, destroyed not by defenders but by fame, excess, and his own inner demons. We're at the end of the 1980s, and European football is dominated by a striker who looks like he comes from another world, Marco van Basten. He embodies the perfect center forward, tall, elegant, technical, and intelligent. Van Basten doesn't just score goals, he creates works of art. His nickname, the Swan of Utrecht, says everything about this unique mix of power and grace. In 1988, he enters football legend for good during the Euros. In the final against the Soviet Union, he scores one of the greatest goals in history, an impossible volley from an angle no one else would have even attempted. That day, he becomes the best player in the world. His domination continues with 3 Ballon d'Ors, 2 European Cups with Milan, and a reputation as an undefendable striker. At just 27, Van Basten stands at the absolute peak of world football. But behind this perfection, his body is collapsing. At a time when tackles from behind are still legal and frequent, defenders target his ankles relentlessly. His right foot becomes a battlefield. Van Basten plays in constant pain, hiding it as best he can. Doctors try everything, injections, surgeries, corrections, but each intervention makes the damage worse instead of slowing it. In May 1993, he plays the Champions League final against Marseille. It is his last match. He is 28 years old, still at the height of his powers, but his body has already given up. For 2 years, he fights to return, pushing through setbacks, failed attempts, desperate trials. Nothing works. In 1995, in front of an emotional San Siro, he announces his retirement. He comes out to greet the supporters in a simple leather jacket, unable to run, barely able to walk normally. On the bench, his coach Fabio Capello breaks down in tears. The world suddenly realizes this isn't an aging player stepping away, it's perhaps the best striker on the planet disappearing in the middle of his reign. Marco van Basten didn't fade away slowly, he was torn away from football at the exact moment he reached his peak. And even today, he might be the only player in history to retire while still objectively one of the very best in the world. At the end of the 1990s, one player shakes the foundations of European football, Hidetoshi Nakata. Japan still has almost no visibility in major leagues, but Nakata arrives in Serie A with the confidence of a veteran. Very quickly, he becomes the first Asian player in history nominated for the Ballon d'Or, a revolution all by himself. In Italy, he establishes himself in the most tactically demanding league in the world. The press even calls him the Japanese Beckham. He plays simple, he plays clean, he sees the game before everyone else. In 2001, he reaches his peak moment with AS Roma. Coming off the bench against Juventus, he literally changes the destiny of the title race. His 25-meter rocket, followed by a decisive action, turns the match around and pushes Roma toward the Scudetto. That day, Nakata becomes an icon. But behind this success, something is fading. The more the spotlight shines on him, the more drained he feels. For him, football slowly stops being a joy. He often says that playing had become mechanical. The weight of fame in Japan, the expectations, the obligations, everything piles up. Nakata continues for a few more seasons, but he never regains that spark. He is still appreciated, still respected, but inside he's gone. And in 2006, after the World Cup, he makes a gesture no one expects. Once the match ends, he lies down alone in the middle of the Westfalenstadion pitch, motionless, eyes to the sky, while the stadium empties around him. It's his farewell. A few days later, he announces his retirement at just 29 years old. Hidetoshi Nakata leaves football the same way he marked it, with total freedom and a class no one could ever take away from him. In the early 2000s, the football world thinks it has found Ronaldo's natural successor, Adriano, a Brazilian striker with unbelievable power, speed, technique, and one of the most violent strikes of his generation. At Inter Milan, he becomes the Emperor, a player no one can truly stop. At 22, he is already one of the best forwards in the world. Then 2004 arrives. Adriano learns of his father's death. From that day on, he is no longer the same. On the pitch, he remains effective for a few more months, but off it, he collapses. Alcohol becomes a refuge. Nights out multiply, training sessions are missed, and Inter watches its jewels slip away. The club tries everything. Psychological support, conversations, disciplinary reminders, nothing works. Adriano is there, but no longer truly present. In Italy, people talk about him as a player who lost his smile. In Brazil, his friends say his father was his anchor, his protection. Without him, Adriano never found the balance required for the life of a top-level athlete. The following years are filled with failed comebacks. Sao Paulo, Flamengo, Roma, each time hope returns for a few matches, then disappears again. Today, Adriano openly accepts his break from professional football. He says he drinks alcohol almost every day without hiding it, and now lives on his own terms, far from the expectations of elite sport. His career wasn't destroyed by a lack of talent, it was broken by a personal grief too heavy to carry, one no one managed to heal. In the early 2000s, Fernando Torres becomes the symbol of Atletico Madrid, El Niño, the one who carries the team and the city before even turning 20. He scores, he creates differences, he embodies the future of Spanish football, but it's at Liverpool that he becomes a true superstar. Between 2007 and 2010, Torres is one of the best number 9 in the world. His runs are perfect. His acceleration makes the difference in a single step, and his finishing is clinical. His match against Real Madrid in 2009, where he dominates their defenders from start to finish, is still a reference. In January 2011, Chelsea decides to break the market to sign him. The club pays €58.5 million, a record amount for an English club during a winter transfer window. It's even the 4th most expensive transfer in history at that moment. But Torres arrives injured. A knee issue has cost him part of his explosiveness. And for a striker whose entire game relies on speed and sudden breaks, that's a massive handicap. His first matches confirm it. He accelerates less, his first touches are less sharp. Then comes the moment that changes everything. A missed one-on-one against Manchester United in front of an empty goal. The clip goes viral. From that point on, every mistake becomes a talking point. Every match becomes an exam. Mentally, he sinks. Physically, he never regains the Liverpool level. He still scores some important goals. One against Barcelona in 2012, another in the Europa League final against Benfica. But they are isolated moments, not signs of a real comeback. The rest of his career is a mix of ups and downs, a spell at AC Milan, a return to Atletico, and a final chapter in Japan. Solid, respectable, but far from the player he once was. The truth is simple, Chelsea never got the Liverpool version of Torres. A knee injury had already begun to change his game, and the pressure of a record transfer did the rest. At Real Madrid, Ruben de la Red is one of those midfielders the club already imagines installing for the next decade. A product of La Fabrica, he stands out for his technique, vision, and intelligence in transitions. Not the most media-friendly player, but one of the most reliable of his generation. In 2007, he is loaned to Getafe. That's where he truly explodes. Consistency, important goals, discreet but obvious leadership. Real Madrid decides to bring him back. At 23, he returns to the Bernabeu with a clear status, a future starter. The year 2008 confirms that rise. Luis Aragonés calls him up for the Euros. He scores a brilliant goal against Greece and takes part in the first major title of a Spain team that will soon dominate the world. Everything suggests he is about to reach a new level. But a few months later, everything stops. During a Copa del Rey match against Real Unión, De La Red suddenly collapses without contact while jogging back into position. He regains consciousness moments later, but the concern is enormous. Medical exams are clear. He suffers from a chronic heart anomaly, a rare, invisible condition, but incompatible with the physical demands of professional football. De La Red spends nearly 2 years undergoing tests, trying adaptations, hoping for a comeback, but his heart cannot sustain the workload required at the highest level. At 25, he announces his retirement. Ruben de la Red remains one of the most brutal and misunderstood endings of his era, a player in full ascent, stopped without warning, at the very moment everything was finally opening up for him. In the early 2000s, Owen Hargreaves quickly establishes himself at Bayern Munich. Versatile, disciplined, capable of pressing, defending, and organizing the game, he becomes essential almost immediately. In 2001, at just 20 years old, he wins the Champions League and proves he has the level to stay among the best. In 2007, Manchester United signs him to strengthen their midfield. His first season is excellent, a decisive free kick against Arsenal, an important role in winning the Champions League, and the feeling that the club has found a long-term leader. But behind that success, one problem begins to block everything: chronic patellar tendonitis in both knees. One of the hardest injuries to manage for a player who depends on repeated sprints, accelerations, and changes of direction. The pain becomes constant. Surgeries follow one after another, as do setbacks. In 2010, after more than a year out, he attempts a comeback. He starts against Wolverhampton and asks to come off after 5 minutes. His knees can no longer handle the effort. A final attempt at Manchester City changes nothing. His body simply cannot keep up. He retires at 31, far too early for a player of his caliber. In the early 2000s, Andy van der Meyde comes out of Ajax's academy with the label of a future Dutch star winger. Fast, technical, unpredictable, he shines in the Champions League, especially during the 2002 campaign where he scores against Roma and reveals himself to the rest of Europe. His potential is obvious, and Inter Milan signs him to boost their attack. But in Italy, he never manages to establish himself. Adaptation is difficult, injuries accumulate, and even though his talent appears at times, he never finds the stability needed to secure a place in the team. Despite this, Everton decides to take the gamble, convinced that a change of environment could revive his career.
Instead, the opposite happens. Everything collapses.
At Everton, injuries become constant, preventing him from gaining rhythm.
And as his playing time decreases, his personal life unravels. Alcohol becomes an escape, nights out multiply, and he isolates himself more and more. His marriage deteriorates, he battles depression, and football slowly fades into the background.
Coaches try to talk to him, but absences, lateness, and disciplinary issues keep piling up. David Moyes can no longer manage him. Van der Meyde plays 20 games in 5 years for Everton. At that point, his potential is only a memory. He leaves Everton after years marked by injuries, alcohol, instability, and a slow loss of direction.
Barely past 30, his career at the highest level is already over. Andy van der Meyde didn't lose himself on the pitch. He lost himself off it, unable to handle pressure, loneliness, and his own demons.
In the early 2000s, Antonio Cassano is considered one of the greatest attacking talents Italy has produced in decades. At 17, he scores an exceptional goal against Inter Milan, perfect control on a long ball, acceleration, cold-blooded finish. A moment that sums up exactly what he was back then, a natural prodigy capable of attempting what no one else dared. Roma invests heavily to sign him, convinced they've found the heir to Roberto Baggio. Technically, Cassano is on par with the very best, but very quickly, one problem becomes obvious. He refuses the demands of top-level football. At Roma and later at Real Madrid, the same pattern repeats. Cassano doesn't follow rules, doesn't adhere to physical programs, and doesn't stay in shape. His weight fluctuates constantly, to the point that the Spanish press nicknames him El Gordito, the chubby. The club fines him repeatedly, but nothing changes. Then come the Cassonate, the outbursts that become his trademark. Insults toward referees, tensions with teammates, repeated clashes with coaches. Fabio Capello, who admired his talent, eventually isolates him. Cassano accepts neither authority nor discipline, nor the structure required to perform at the highest level.
His later spells at Sampdoria, AC Milan, and Inter show glimpses of brilliance, but never consistently.
As the years go by, his natural ability remains intact, but professionalism never appears. Antonio Cassano wasn't undone by injury or media pressure. His ceiling was enormous, but he refused to make the sacrifices required to reach it. When Abou Diaby arrives at Arsenal at 19, he's immediately seen as a future cornerstone of the midfield. Tall, elegant, powerful on the ball, technically superior, he reminds Arsene Wenger of what Vieira could have been in an even more attack-minded version. His performance against Bolton in 2006 impresses everyone. Arsenal believes they've found a midfielder capable of marking the club's history, but a few months later, everything collapses. In May 2006, during a match against Sunderland, Dan Smith makes a wildly late tackle. The impact is brutal. Diaby suffers a severe ankle fracture with deep ligament damage. The surgery is heavy, and doctors already warn that a return to the highest level will be complicated. The problem is that this injury becomes the starting point of an endless cycle. When he returns, his weight-bearing mechanics have changed. His body compensates, then destabilizes. Calves, hamstrings, thighs, knees. Over the next 10 years, Diaby suffers more than 40 different injuries. Every time he regains rhythm, a new issue appears. Arsenal tries everything: personalized programs, reduced sessions, specific strengthening, reinforced medical monitoring, but nothing works. His body, altered by the initial injury, can no longer withstand the repeated demands of professional football. Diaby never loses his talent. On the rare occasions he strings games together, he dominates midfields with ease. In 2012 against Liverpool, he delivers one of the best performances of his career, confirming the player he could have been. But as always, the setback follows. When he leaves Arsenal, he has never really had the chance to show his level over a full season. A spell at Marseille changes nothing. His body simply can't cope anymore. He eventually retires without bitterness, but with the frustration of never having been able to play freely. We've just gone through 10 players whose careers broke far too early, each for different but always striking reasons. If you want a part 2 with more stories like these, tell me in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. See you soon.